You are wrong, Cher. The boat is going at top speed. But the Zuider Zee is a dead sea, or almost. With its flat shores lost in the fog, there's no saying where it begins or ends. So we are steaming along without any landmark. We can't gauge our speed. We are making progress, and yet nothing is changing. It's not navigation, but dreaming. In the Greek archipelago, I had the contrary feeling. Constantly new islands would appear on the horizon. Their treeless backbone marked the limit of the sky, and their rocky shore contrasted sharply with the sea. No confusion possible. In the sharp light, everything was a landmark. And from one island to another, ceaselessly on our little boat, which was nevertheless dawdling, I felt as if we were scudding along night and day on the crest of the short, cool waves in a race full of spray and laughter. Since then, Greece itself drifts somewhere within me, on the edge of my memory, tirelessly. Hold on. I too am drifting. I'm becoming lyrical. Stop me, Cher. I beg you. By the way, do you know Greece? No? So much the better. What should we do there, I ask you? There one has to be pure in heart. Do you know that their male friends walk along the street in pairs holding hands? Yes, the women stay home, and you often see a middle-aged, respectable man, sporting moustaches, gravely striding along the sidewalks, his fingers locked in those of his friend. In the Orient, likewise, at times. All right. But tell me, would you take my hand in the streets of Paris? Oh, I'm joking. We have a sense of decorum. Scum makes us stilted. Before appearing in the Greek islands, we should have to wash at length. There the air is chaste and sensual enjoyment, as transparent as the sea. And let's sit down on these steamer chairs. What a fog! I interrupted myself, I believe, on the way to the Little Ease. Yes, I'll tell you what I mean. After having struggled, after having used up all my insolent airs, discouraged by the uselessness of my efforts, I made up my mind to leave the society of men. No, I didn't look for a desert island. There are no more. I simply took refuge among women. As you know, they don't really condemn any weakness. They would be more inclined to try to humiliate or disarm our strength. This is why woman is the reward, not of the warrior, but of the criminal. She is his harbour, his haven. It is in a woman's bed that he is generally arrested. Is she not all that remains to us of earthly paradise? In distress, I hastened to my natural harbour. But I no longer indulged in pretty speeches. I still gambled a little, out of habit. But invention was lacking. I hesitate to admit it for fear of using a few more naughty words. It seems to me that at that time I felt the need of love. Obscene, isn't it? In any case, I experienced a secret suffering, a sort of privation that made me emptier and allowed me, partly through obligation and partly out of curiosity, to make a few commitments. Inasmuch as I needed to love and be loved, I thought I was in love. In other words, I acted the fool. I often caught myself asking a question which, as a man of experience, I had always previously avoided. I would hear myself asking, "Do you love me?" You know that it is customary to answer in such cases. And you. If I answered yes, I found myself committed beyond my real feelings. If I dared to say no, I ran the risk of ceasing to be loved, and I would suffer, therefore. The greater the threat to the feeling in which I had hoped to find calm, the more I demanded that feeling of my partner. Hence I was led to ever more explicit promises, and came to expect of my heart an ever more sweeping feeling. Thus I developed a deceptive passion for a charming fool of a woman who had so thoroughly read true love stories that she spoke of love with the assurance and conviction of an intellectual announcing the classless society. Such conviction, as you must know, is contagious. I tried myself out at tallying likewise of love, and eventually convinced myself. at least until she became my mistress, and I realized that the true love stories, though they taught how to talk of love, did not teach how to make love. After having loved a parrot, I had to go to bed with a serpent. So I looked elsewhere for the love promised by books, which I had never encountered in life. But I lacked practice. For more than 30 years I had been in love exclusively with myself. What hope was there of losing such a habit? I didn't lose it and remained a trifler in passion. I multiplied the promises. I contracted simultaneous loves as, at an earlier period, I had multiple liaisons. In this way, I piled up more misfortunes for others than at the time of my fine indifference. Have I told you that in despair my parrot wanted to let herself die of hunger? Fortunately, I arrived in time and submitted to holding her hand until she met, on his return from a journey to Bali, the engineer with greying temples who had already been described to her by her favourite weekly. In any case, far from finding myself transported and absolved in the whirlwind, as the saying goes, of passion, I added even more to the weight of my crimes and to my deviation from virtue. As a result, I conceived such a loathing for love that for years I could not hear La Vie en Rose or the Liebestod without gritting my teeth. I tried accordingly to give up women in a certain way and to live in a state of chastity. After all, their friendship ought to satisfy me. But this was tantamount to giving up gambling. Without desire, women bored me beyond all expectation, and obviously I bored them too. No more gambling and no more theatre. I was probably in the realm of truth. But truth, cher ami, is a colossal bore. Despairing of love and of chastity, I at last bethought myself of debauchery, a substitute for love which quiets the laughter, restores silence, and above all, confers immortality. At a certain degree of lucid intoxication, lying late at night between two prostitutes and drained of all desire, hope ceases to be a torture, you see. The mind dominates the whole past, and the pain of living is over forever. In a sense, I had always lived in debauchery, never having ceased wanting to be immortal. Wasn't this the key to my nature, and also a result of the great self-love I have told you about? Yes, I was bursting with the longing to be immortal. I was too much in love with myself not to want the precious object of my love never to disappear. Since, in the waking state, and with a little self-knowledge, one can see no reason why immortality should be conferred on a salacious monkey, one has to obtain substitutes for that immortality. Because I longed for eternal life, I went to bed with harlots and drank for nights on end. In the morning, to be sure, my mouth was filled with the bitter taste of the mortal state. But, for hours on end, I had soared in bliss. Dare I admit it to you? I still remember with affection certain nights when I used to go to a sordid nightclub to meet a quick-change dancer who honoured me with her favours and for whose reputation I even fought one evening with a bearded braggart. Every night I would strut at the bar in the red light and dust of that earthly paradise, lying fantastically and drinking at length. I would wait for dawn and at last end up in the always unmade bed of my princess, who would indulge mechanically in sex and then sleep without transition. Day would come softly to throw light on this disaster, and I would get up and stand motionless in a dawn of glory. Alcohol and women provided me, I admit, the only solace of which I was worthy. I'll reveal this secret to you, cher ami. Don't fear to make use of it. Then you'll see that true debauchery is liberating because it creates no obligations. In it, you possess only yourself. Hence it remains the favourite pastime of the great lovers of their own person. It is a jungle without past or future, without any promise above all, nor any immediate penalty. The places where it is practised are separated from the world. On entering, one leaves behind fear and hope. Conversation is not obligatory there. What one comes for can be had without words, and often indeed without money. I beg you, Let me pay honour to the unknown and forgotten women who helped me then. Even today, my recollection of them contains something resembling respect. In any case, I freely took advantage of that liberation. I was even seen in a hotel dedicated to what is called sin, living simultaneously with a mature prostitute and an unmarried girl of the best society. I played the gallant with the first and gave the second an opportunity to learn the realities. Unfortunately, the prostitute had a most middle-class nature. She since consented to write her memoirs for a confessions magazine quite open to modern ideas. The girl, for her part, got married to satisfy her unbridled instincts and make use of her remarkable gifts. I am not a little proud likewise to have been admitted as an equal at that time by a masculine guild too often reviled. But I'll not insist on that. You know that even very intelligent people glory in being able to empty one bottle more than the next man. I might ultimately have found peace and release in that happy dissipation. But there, too, I encountered an obstacle in myself. This time it was my liver, and a fatigue so dreadful that it hasn't yet left me. One plays at being immortal, and after a few weeks one doesn't even know whether or not one can hang on till the next day. The sole benefit of that experience, when I had given up my nocturnal exploits, was that life became less painful for me. The fatigue that was gnawing at my body had simultaneously cauterized many raw spots in me. Each excess decreases vitality, hence suffering. There is nothing frenzied about debauchery, contrary to what is thought. It is but a long sleep. You must have noticed that men who really suffer from jealousy have no more urgent desire than to go to bed with the woman they nevertheless think has betrayed them. Of course, they want to assure themselves once more that their dear treasure still belongs to them. They want to possess it, as the saying goes. But there is also the fact that immediately afterward they are less jealous. Physical jealousy is a result of the imagination at the same time that it is a self-judgment. One attributes to the rival the nasty thoughts one had oneself in the same circumstances. Fortunately, excessive sensual satisfaction weakens both imagination and judgment. The suffering then lies dormant as long as virility does. For the same reasons, adolescents lose their metaphysical unrest with their first mistress. And certain marriages, which are merely formalized debauches, become the monotonous hearses of daring and invention. Yes, cher ami, bourgeois marriage has put our country into slippers and will soon lead it to the gates of death. I'm exaggerating. No, but I'm straying from the subject. I merely wanted to tell you the advantage I derived from those months of orgy. I lived in a sort of fog in which the laughter became so muffled that eventually I ceased to notice it. The indifference that already had such a hold over me now encountered no resistance and extended its sclerosis. No more emotions, an even temper, or rather no temper at all. Tubercular lungs are cured by drying up and gradually asphyxiate their happy owner. So it was with me as I peacefully died of my cure. I was still living on my work, although my reputation was seriously damaged by my flights of language and the regular exercise of my profession compromised by the disorder of my life. It is noteworthy, however, that I aroused less resentment by my nocturnal excesses than by my verbal provocations. The reference, purely verbal, that I often made to God in my speeches before the court awakened mistrust in my clients. They probably feared that heaven could not represent their interests, as well as a lawyer invincible when it came to the code of law. Whence it was but a step to conclude that I invoked the divinity in proportion to my ignorance. My clients took that step and became scarce. Now and then I still argued a case. At times even, forgetting that I no longer believed in what I was saying, I was a good advocate. My own voice would lead me on, and I would follow it. Without really soaring, as I once did, I at least got off the ground and did a little hedge-hopping. Outside of my profession, I saw but few people, and painfully kept alive one or two tired liaisons. It even happened that I would spend purely friendly evenings, without any element of desire, yet with the difference that, resigned to boredom, I scarcely listened to what was being said. I became a little fatter, and at last was able to believe that the crisis was over. Nothing remained but to grow older. One day, however, during a trip to which I was treating a friend, without telling her I was doing so to celebrate my cure, I was aboard an ocean liner, on the upper deck, of course. Suddenly, far off at sea, I perceived a black speck on the steel-grey ocean. I turned away at once, and my heart began to beat wildly. When I forced myself to look, the black speck had disappeared. I was on the point of shouting, of stupidly calling for help, when I saw it again. It was one of those bits of refuse that ships leave behind them. Yet I had not been able to endure watching it, for I had thought at once of a drowning person. Then I realized, calmly as you resign yourself to an idea, the truth of which you have long known, that cry which had sounded over the Seine behind me years before had never ceased, carried by the river, to the waiters of the Channel, to travel throughout the world, across the limitless expanse of the ocean, and that it had waited for me there until the day I had encountered it. I realized likewise that it would continue to await me on seas and rivers, everywhere, in short, where lies the bitter water of my baptism. Here too, by the way, aren't we on the water? On this flat, monotonous, interminable water whose limits are indistinguishable from those of the land? Is it credible that we shall ever reach Amsterdam? We shall never get out of this immense holy water fount. Listen. Don't you hear the cries of invisible gulls? If they are crying in our direction, to what are they calling us? But they are the same gulls that were crying, that were already calling over the Atlantic, the day I realized definitively that I was not cured, that I was still cornered, and that I had to make shift with it. Ended the glorious life, but ended also the frenzy and the convulsions. I had to submit and admit my guilt. I had to live in the little ease. To be sure, you are not familiar with that dungeon cell that was called the Little Ease in the Middle Ages. In general, one was forgotten there for life. That cell was distinguished from others by ingenious dimensions. It was not high enough to stand up in, nor yet wide enough to lie down in. One had to take on an awkward manner and live on the diagonal. Sleep was a collapse, and waking a squatting. Mon cher, there was genius, and I am weighing my words, in that so simple invention. Every day through the unchanging restriction that stiffened his body, the condemned man learned that he was guilty, and that innocence consists in stretching joyously. Can you imagine in that cell a frequenter of summits and upper decks? What? One could live in those cells and still be innocent? Improbable, highly improbable. Or else my reasoning would collapse. That innocence should be reduced to living hunchbacked. I refuse to entertain for a second such a hypothesis. Moreover, we cannot assert the innocence of anyone, whereas we can state with certainty the guilt of all. Every man testifies to the crime of all the others. That is my faith and my hope. Believe me, religions are on the wrong track the moment they moralize and fulminate commandments. God is not needed to create guilt or to punish. Our fellow men suffice, aided by ourselves. You were speaking of the last judgment. Allow me to laugh respectfully. I shall wait for it resolutely, for I have known what is worse, the judgment of men. For them, no extenuating circumstances, even the good intention, is ascribed to crime. Have you at least heard of the spitting cell, which a nation recently thought up to prove itself the greatest on earth? A walled-up box in which the prisoner can stand without moving. The solid door that locks him in his cement shell stops at chin level. Hence only his face is visible, and every passing jailer spits copiously on it. The prisoner, wedged into his cell, cannot wipe his face, though he is allowed, it is true, to close his eyes. Well, that, mon cher, is a human invention. They didn't need God, for that little masterpiece. What of it? Well, God's sole usefulness would be to guarantee innocence, and I am inclined to see religion rather as a huge laundering venture, as it was once but briefly for exactly 3 years, and it wasn't called religion. Since then, soap has been lacking, our faces are dirty, and we wipe one another's noses. All dunces, all punished, let's all spit on one another, and hurry, to the little ease. Each tries to spit first, that's all. I'll tell you a big secret, mon cher. Don't wait for the last judgment. It takes place every day. No, it's nothing. I'm merely shivering a little in this damned humidity. We're landing anyway. Here we are. After you. But stay a little, I beg you, and walk home with me. I haven't finished. I must go on. Continuing is what is hard. Say, do you know why he was crucified? The one you are perhaps thinking of at this moment? Well, there were heaps of reasons for that. There are always reasons for murdering a man. On the contrary, it is impossible to justify his living. That's why crime always finds lawyers and innocence only rarely. But, beside the reasons that have been very well explained to us for the past 2,000 years, there was a major one for that terrible agony, and I don't know why it has been so carefully hidden. The real reason is that he knew he was not altogether innocent. If he did not bear the weight of the crime he was accused of, he had committed others, even though he didn't know which ones. Did he really not know them? He was at the source, after all. He must have heard of a certain slaughter of the innocents. The children of Judea massacred while his parents were taking him to a safe place. Why did they die, if not because of him? Those blood-spattered soldiers, those infants cut in two, filled him with horror. But given the man he was, I am sure he could not forget them. And as for that sadness that can be felt in his every act, wasn't it the incurable melancholy of a man who heard night after night the voice of Rachel weeping for her children and refusing all comfort? The lamentation would rend the night. Rachel would call her children who had been killed for him, and he was still alive. Knowing what he knew, familiar with everything about man, who would have believed that crime consists less in making others die than in not dying oneself? Brought face to face day and night with his innocent crime, he found it too hard for him to hold on and continue. It was better to have done with it, not to defend himself, to die, in order not to be the only one to live, and to go elsewhere where perhaps he would be upheld. He was not upheld, he complained, and as a last straw he was censored. Yes, it was the third evangelist, I believe, who first suppressed his complaint. Why hast thou forsaken me? It was a seditious cry, wasn't it? Well then, the scissors. Mind you, if Luke had suppressed nothing, the matter would hardly have been noticed. In any case, it would not have assumed such importance. Thus the censor shouts aloud what he prescribes. The world's order likewise is ambiguous. Nonetheless, the censored one was unable to carry on. And I know, cher, whereof I speak. There was a time when I didn't at any minute have the slightest idea how I could reach the next one. Yes, one can wage war in this world, ape love, torture one's fellow man, or merely say evil of one's neighbour while knitting. But, in certain cases, carrying on, merely continuing, is superhuman. And he was not superhuman. You can take my word for it. He cried aloud his agony, and that's why I love him, my friend who died without knowing. The unfortunate thing is that he left us alone to carry on whatever happens, even when we are lodged in the little ease, knowing in turn what he knew, but incapable of doing what he did and of dying like him. People naturally tried to get some help from his death. After all, it was a stroke of genius to tell us, "You're not a very pretty sight, that's certain." Well, we won't go into the details. We'll just liquidate it all at once, on the cross. But too many people now climb onto the cross merely to be seen from a greater distance, even if they have to trample somewhat on the one who has been there so long. Too many people have decided to do without generosity in order to practice charity. Oh, the injustice, the rank injustice that has been done him. It wrings my heart. Good heavens, the habit has seized me again, and I'm on the point of making a speech to the court. Forgive me, and realize that I have my reasons. Why? A few streets from here, there is a museum called Our Lord in the attic. At the time, they had the catacombs in the attic. After all, the cellars are flooded here. But today, set your mind at rest. Their Lord is neither in the attic nor in the cellar. They have hoisted him onto a judge's bench in the secret of their hearts, and they smite, they judge above all, they judge in his name. He spoke softly to the adulteress. Neither do I condemn thee. But that doesn't matter. They condemn without absolving anyone. In the name of the Lord, here is what you deserve. Lord? He, my friend, didn't expect so much. He simply wanted to be loved, nothing more. Of course, there are those who love him, even among Christians. But they are not numerous. He had foreseen that too. He had a sense of humour. Peter, you know, the coward, Peter denied him. I know not the man. I know not what thou sayest, etc. Really, he went too far. And my friend makes a play on words. Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Irony could go no further, don't you think? But no, they still triumph. You see, he had said it. He had said it indeed. He knew the question thoroughly. And then he left forever, leaving them to judge and condemn, with pardon on their lips and the sentence in their hearts. For it cannot be said there is no more pity. No, good Lord, we never stop talking of it. Simply, no one is ever acquitted any more. On dead innocents, the judges swarm, the judges of all species, those of Christ and those of the Antichrist, who are the same anyway, reconciled in the little ease. For one mustn't blame everything exclusively on the Christians. The others are involved too. Do you know what has become of one of the houses in this city that sheltered Descartes? A lunatic asylum. Yes, general delirium and persecution. We too, naturally, are obliged to come to it. You have had a chance to observe that I spare nothing. And as for you, I know that you agree in thought. Wherefore, since we are all judges, we are all guilty before one another, all Christs in our mean manner, one by one crucified, always without knowing. We should be at least if I, Clamence, had not found a way out. The only solution. Truth, at last. No, I am stopping, cher ami. Fear nothing. Besides, I'm going to leave you, for we are at my door. In solitude and when fatigued, one is after all inclined to take oneself for a prophet. When all is said and done, that's really what I am, having taken refuge in a desert of stones, fogs, and stagnant waters, an empty prophet for shabby times, Elijah without a Messiah, choked with fever and alcohol, my back up against this mouldy door, my finger raised toward a threatening sky, showering imprecations on lawless men who cannot endure any judgment. For they can't endure it, très cher, and that's the whole question. He who clings to a law does not fear the judgment that reinstates him in an order he believes in. But the keenest of human torments is to be judged without a law. Yet we are in that torment. Deprived of their natural curb, the judges, loosed at random, are racing through their job. Hence we have to try to go faster than they, don't we? And it's a real madhouse. Prophets and quacks multiply. They hasten to get there with a good law or a flawless organization before the world is deserted. Fortunately, I arrived. I am the end and the beginning. I announce the law. In short, I am a judge-penitent. Yes, I'll tell you tomorrow what this noble profession consists of. You are leaving the day after tomorrow, so we are in a hurry. Come to my place, will you? Just ring 3 times. You are going back to Paris. Paris is far. Paris is beautiful. I haven't forgotten it. I remember its twilights at about this same season. Evening falls, dry and rustling, over the roofs blue with smoke, the city rumbles, the river seems to flow backward. Then I used to wander in the streets. They wander now too, I know. They wander, pretending to hasten toward the tired wife, the forbidding home. Ah, mon ami, do you know what the solitary creature is like as he wanders in big cities? I'm embarrassed to be in bed when you arrive. It's nothing, just a little fever that I'm treating with gin. I'm accustomed to these attacks. Malaria, I think, that I caught at the time I was Pope. No, I'm only half joking. I know what you're thinking. It's very hard to disentangle the true from the false in what I'm saying. I admit you are right. I myself. You see, a person I knew used to divide human beings into 3 categories. Those who prefer having nothing to hide rather than being obliged to lie. Those who prefer lying to having nothing to hide. And finally, those who like both lying and the hidden. I'll let you choose the pigeonhole that suits me. But what do I care? Don't lies eventually lead to the truth? And don't all my stories, true or false, tend toward the same conclusion? Don't they all have the same meaning? So what does it matter whether they are true or false, if, in both cases, they are significant of what I have been and of what I am? Sometimes it is easier to see clearly into the liar than into the man who tells the truth. Truth, like light, blinds. Falsehood, on the contrary, is a beautiful twilight that enhances every object. Well, make of it what you will, but I was named Pope in a prison camp. Sit down, please. You are examining this room. Bare, to be sure, but clean. A Vermeer, without furniture or copper pots. Without books either, for I gave up reading some time ago. At one time, my house was full of half-read books. That's just as disgusting as those people who cut a piece off a foie gras and have the rest thrown out. Anyway, I have ceased to like anything but confessions, and authors of confessions write especially to avoid confessing, to tell nothing of what they know. When they claim to get to the painful admissions, you have to watch out, for they are about to dress the corpse. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. So I put a stop to it. No more books, no more useless objects either. The bare necessities, clean and polished like a coffin. Besides, these Dutch beds, so hard and with their immaculate sheets. One dies in them as if already wrapped in a shroud, embalmed in purity. You are curious to know my pontifical adventures. Nothing out of the ordinary, you know. Shall I have the strength to tell you of them? Yes, the fever is going down. It was all so long ago. It was in Africa where, thanks to a certain Rommel, war was raging. I wasn't involved in it. No, don't worry. I had already dodged the one in Europe. Mobilized it, of course, but I never saw action. In a way, I regret it. Maybe that would have changed many things. The French army didn't need me on the front. It merely asked me to take part in the retreat. A little later I got back to Paris, and the Germans. I was tempted by the resistance, about which people were beginning to talk, just about the time I discovered that I was patriotic. You are smiling? You are wrong. I made my discovery on a subway platform at the Châtelet station. A dog had strayed into the labyrinth of passageways. Big, weary-hired, one ear cocked, eyes laughing, he was cavorting and sniffing the passing legs. I have a very old and very faithful attachment for dogs. I like them because they always forgive. I called this one, who hesitated, obviously won over, wagging his tail enthusiastically a few yards ahead of me. Just then, a young German soldier, who was walking briskly, passed me. Having reached the dog, he caressed the shaggy head. Without hesitating, the animal fell in step with the same enthusiasm and disappeared with him. From the resentment and the sort of rage I felt against the German soldier, it was dear to me that my reaction was patriotic. If the dog had followed a French civilian, I'd not even have thought of it. But on the contrary, I imagined that friendly dog as the mascot of a German regiment, and that made me fly into a rage. Hence the test was convincing. I reached the southern zone with the intention of finding out about the resistance, but once there and having found out, I hesitated. The undertaking struck me as a little mad, and, in a word, romantic. I think especially that underground action suited neither my temperament nor my preference for exposed heights. It seemed to me that I was being asked to do some weaving in a cellar, for days and nights on end, until some brutes should come to haul me from hiding, undo my weaving, and then drag me to another cellar to beat me to death. I admired those who indulged in such heroism of the depths, but couldn't imitate them, so I crossed over to North Africa with the vague intention of getting to London. But in Africa, the situation was not clear. The opposing parties seemed to be equally right, and I stood aloof. I can see from your manner that I am skipping rather fast, in your opinion, over these details which have a certain significance. Well, let's say that, having judged you at your true value, I am skipping over them so that you will notice them the better. In any case, I eventually reached Tunisia, where a fond friend gave me work. That friend was a very intelligent woman who was involved in the movies. I followed her to Tunis and didn't discover her real business until the days following the Allied landing in Algeria. She was arrested that day by the Germans, and I too, but without having intended it. I don't know what became of her. As for me, no harm was done me, and I realized, after considerable anguish, that it was chiefly as a security measure. I was interned near Tripoli in a camp where we suffered from thirst and destitution more than from brutality. I'll not describe it to you. We children of the mid-century don't need a diagram to imagine such places. 150 years ago, people became sentimental about lakes and forests. Today, we have the lyricism of the prison cell. Hence, I'll leave it to you. You need add but a few details. The heat, the vertical sun, the flies, the sand, the lack of water. There was a young Frenchman with me who had faith. Yes, it's decidedly a fairy tale. The du Guesclin type, if you will. He had crossed over from France into Spain to go and fight. The Catholic general had interned him, and having seen that in the Franco camps, the chickpeas were, if I may say so, blessed by Rome. He had developed a profound melancholy. Neither the sky of Africa, where he had next landed, nor the leisures of the camp had distracted him from that melancholy. But his reflections, and the sun too, had somewhat unhinged him. One day when, under a tent that seemed to drip molten lead, the 10 or so of us were panting among the flies, he repeated his diatribes against the Roman, as he called him. He looked at us with a wild stare, his face unshaven for days. Bare to the waist and covered with sweat, he drummed with his hands on the visible keyboard of his ribs. He declared to us the need for a new pope who should live among the wretched instead of praying on a throne, and the sooner the better. He stared with wild eyes as he shook his head. Yes, he repeated, as soon as possible. Then he calmed down suddenly, and in a dull voice said that we must choose him among us. Pick a complete man with his vices and virtues, and swear allegiance to him on the sole condition that he should agree to keep alive, in himself and in others, the community of our sufferings. Who among us, he asked, has the most failings? As a joke, I raised my hand and was the only one to do so. Okay, Jean-Baptiste will do. No, he didn't say just that because I had another name then. He declared at least that nominating oneself as I had done presupposed also the greatest virtue and proposed electing me. The others agreed, in fun, but with a trace of seriousness all the same. The truth is that du Guesclin had impressed us. It seems to me that even I was not altogether laughing. To begin with, I considered that my little prophet was right, and then, with the sun, the exhausting labour, the struggle for water, We were not up to snuff. In any case, I exercised my pontificate for several weeks with increasing seriousness. Of what did it consist? Well, I was something like a group leader or the secretary of a cell. The others, in any case, and even those who lacked faith, got into the habit of obeying me. Du Guesclin was suffering. I administered his suffering. I discovered then that it was not so easy as I thought to be a pope, and I remembered this just yesterday after having given you such a scornful speech on judges, our brothers. The big problem in the camp was the water allotment. Other groups, political or sectarian, had formed, and each prisoner favoured his comrades. I was consequently led to favour mine, and this was a little concession to begin with. Even among us, I could not maintain complete equality. According to my comrades' condition or the work they had to do, I gave an advantage to this or that one. Such distinctions are far-reaching, you can take my word for it. But decidedly I am tired and no longer want to think of that period. Let's just say that I closed the circle the day I drank the water of a dying comrade. No, it wasn't Du Guesclin. He was already dead, I believe, for he stinted himself too much. Besides, had he been there, out of love for him, I'd have resisted longer, for I loved him. Yes, I loved him, or so it seems to me. But I drank the water, that's certain, while convincing myself that the others needed me more than this fellow who was going to die anyway, and that I had a duty to keep myself alive for them. Thus, cher, empires and churches are born under the sun of death. And in order to correct somewhat what I said yesterday, I am going to tell you the great idea that has come to me while telling all this, which, I'm not sure now, I may have lived or only dreamed. My great idea is that one must forgive the Pope. To begin with, he needs it more than anyone else. Secondly, that's the only way to set oneself above him. Did you close the door thoroughly? Yes? Make sure, please. Forgive me, I have the bolt complex. On the point of going to sleep, I can never remember whether or not I pushed the bolt, and every night I must get up to verify. One can be sure of nothing, as I've told you. Don't think that this worry about the bolt is the reaction of a frightened possessor. Formerly I didn't lock my apartment or my car. I didn't lock up my money. I didn't cling to what I owned. To tell the truth, I was a little ashamed to own anything. Didn't I occasionally, in my social remarks, exclaim with conviction, "Property, gentlemen, is murder"? Not being sufficiently big-hearted to share my wealth with a deserving poor man, I left it at the disposal of possible thieves, hoping thus to correct injustice by chance. Today, moreover, I possess nothing. Hence, I am not worried about my safety, but about myself and my presence of mind. I am also eager to block the door of the closed little universe of which I am the king, the pope, and the judge. By the way, will you please open that cupboard? Yes, look at that painting. Don't you recognize it? It is The Just Judges. That doesn't make you jump. Can it be that your culture has gaps? Yet, if you read the papers, you would recall the theft in 1934 the St. Bavon Cathedral of Ghent, of one of the panels of the famous Van Eyck altarpiece, The Adoration of the Lamb. That panel was called The Just Judges. It represented judges on horseback coming to adore the sacred animal. It was replaced by an excellent copy, for the original was never found. Well, here it is. No, I had nothing to do with it. A frequenter of Mexico City. You had a glimpse of him the other evening. Sold it to the ape for a bottle, one drunken evening. I first advised our friend to hang it in a place of honour, and for a long time, while they were being looked for throughout the world, our devout judges sat enthroned at Mexico City above the drunks and pimps. Then the ape, at my request, put it in custody here. He balked a little at doing so, but he got a fright when I explained the matter to him. Since then, these estimable magistrates form my sole company. At Mexico City, above the bar, you saw what a void they left. Why I did not return the panel. Ah, Ah, you have a policeman's reflex, you do. Well, I'll answer you as I would the state's attorney, if it could ever occur to anyone that this painting had wound up in my room. First, because it belongs not to me, but to the proprietor of Mexico City, who deserves it as much as the Archbishop of Ghent. Secondly, because among all those who file by the adoration of the Lamb, no one could distinguish the copy from the original, and hence no one is wronged by my misconduct. Thirdly, because in this way I dominate. False judges are held up to the world's admiration, and I alone know the true ones. Fourth, because I thus have a chance of being sent to prison, an attractive idea in a way. Fifth, because those judges are on their way to meet the Lamb, because there is no more lamb or innocence, and because the clever rascal who stole the panel was an instrument of the unknown justice that one ought not to thwart. Finally, because this way everything is in harmony. Justice being definitively separated from innocence, the latter on the cross and the former in the cupboard, I have the way clear to work according to my convictions. With a clear conscience, I can practice the difficult profession of judge-penitent, in which I have set myself up after so many blighted hopes and contradictions. And now it is time, since you are leaving, for me to tell you what it is. Allow me first to sit up so I can breathe more easily. Oh, how weak I am! Lock up my judges, please. As for the profession of judge-penitent, I am practicing it at present. Ordinarily, my offices are at Mexico City, but real vocations are carried beyond the place of work. Even in bed, even with a fever, I am functioning. Besides, one doesn't practice this profession, one breathes it constantly. Don't get the idea that I have talked to you at such length for 5 days, just for the fun of it. No, I used to talk through my hat quite enough in the past. Now my words have a purpose. They have the purpose, obviously, of silencing the laughter, of avoiding judgment personally, though there is apparently no escape. Is not the great thing that stands in the way of our escaping it the fact that we are the first to condemn ourselves? Therefore, it is essential to begin by extending the condemnation to all without distinction, in order to thin it out at the start. No excuses ever for anyone. That's my principle at the outset. I deny the good intention, the respectable mistake, the indiscretion, the extenuating circumstance. With me there is no giving of absolution or blessing. Everything is simply totted up, and then it comes to so much. You are an evildoer, a satyr, a congenital liar, a homosexual, an artist, etc. Just like that. Just as flatly. In philosophy as in politics, I am for any theory that refuses to grant man innocence, and for any practice that treats him as guilty. You see in me, très cher, an enlightened advocate of slavery. Without slavery, as a matter of fact, there is no definitive solution. I very soon realized that. Once upon a time, I was always talking of freedom. At breakfast, I used to spread it on my toast. I used to chew it all day long, and in company my breath was delightfully redolent of freedom. With that key word, I would bludgeon whoever contradicted me. I made it serve my desires and my power. I used to whisper it in bed in the ear of my sleeping mates, and it helped me to drop them. I would slip it. Tsk, tsk. I am getting excited and losing all sense of proportion. After all, I did on occasion make a more disinterested use of freedom, and even, just imagine my naivete, defended it 2 or 3 times, without of course going so far as to die for it, but nevertheless, taking a few risks. I must be forgiven such rash acts. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know that freedom is not a reward or a decoration that is celebrated with champagne, nor yet a gift, a box of dainties designed to make you lick your chops. Oh no, it's a chore on the contrary, and a long-distance race, quite solitary and very exhausting. No champagne, no friends raising their glasses as they look at you affectionately. Alone in a forbidding room, alone in the prisoner's bog before the judges, and alone to decide in face of oneself or in the face of others' judgment. At the end of all freedom is a court sentence. That's why freedom is too heavy to bear, especially when you're down with a fever, or are distressed, or love nobody. Ah, mon cher, for anyone who is alone, without God and without a master, the weight of days is dreadful. Hence one must choose a master, God being out of style. Besides, that word has lost its meaning. It's not worth the risk of shocking anyone. Take our moral philosophers, for instance, so serious, loving their neighbour, and all the rest. Nothing distinguishes them from Christians, except that they don't preach in churches. What, in your opinion, keeps them from becoming converted? Respect, perhaps, respect for men, yes, human respect. They don't want to start a scandal, so they keep their feelings to themselves. For example, I knew an atheistic novelist who used to pray every night. That didn't stop anything. How he gave it to God in his books. What a dusting off, as someone or other would say. A militant freethinker to whom I spoke of this raised his hands, with no evil intention, I assure you, to heaven. You're telling me nothing new. That apostle sighed. They are all like that. According to him, 80% of our writers, if only they could avoid signing, would write and hail the name of God. But they sign, according to him, because they love themselves, and they hail nothing at all because they loathe themselves. Since, nevertheless, they cannot keep themselves from judging, they make up for it by moralizing. In short, their Satanism is virtuous. An odd epoch indeed. It's not at all surprising that minds are confused, and that one of my friends, an atheist when he was a model husband, got converted when he became an adulterer. Ah, the little sneaks, play actors, hypocrites, and yet so touching. Believe me, they all are, even when they set fire to heaven. Whether they are atheists or churchgoers, Muscovites or Bostonians, all Christians from father to son. But it so happens that there is no more father, no more rule. They are free, and hence have to shift for themselves, and since they don't want freedom or its judgments, they ask to be rapped on the knuckles. They invent dreadful rules. They rush out to build piles of fagots to replace churches. Savonarolas, I tell you. But they believe solely in sin, never in grace. They think of it, to be sure. Grace is what they want, acceptance, surrender, happiness, and maybe, for they are sentimental too, betrothal, the virginal bride, the upright man, the organ music. Take me, for example, and I am not sentimental. Do you know what I used to dream of? A total love of the whole heart and body, day and night, in an uninterrupted embrace, sensual enjoyment and mental excitement, all lasting 5 years and ending in death. Alas! So after all, for want of betrothal or uninterrupted love, it will be marriage, brutal marriage, with power and the whip. The essential is that everything should become simple. As for the child, that every act should be ordered, that good and evil should be arbitrarily, hence obviously pointed out. And I agree, however Sicilian and Javanese I may be, and not at all Christian, though I feel friendship for the first Christian of all. But on the bridges of Paris I, too, learned that I was afraid of freedom. So hooray for the Master, whoever he may be, to take the place of heaven's law. Our Father who art provisionally here, our guides, our delightfully severe masters, O cruel and beloved leaders. In short, you see, the essential is to cease being free and to obey, in repentance, a greater rogue than oneself. When we are all guilty, that will be democracy, without counting, cher ami, that we must take revenge for having to die alone. Death is solitary, whereas slavery is collective. The others get theirs too, and at the same time as we, that's what counts. All together at last, but on our knees and heads bowed. Isn't it good likewise to live like the rest of the world, and for that doesn't the rest of the world have to be like me? Threat, dishonour, police are the sacraments of that resemblance. Scorned, hunted down, compelled, I can then show what I am worth, enjoy what I am, be natural at last. This is why, très cher, after having solemnly paid my respects to freedom, I decided on the sly that it had to be handed over without delay to anyone who comes along. And every time I can, I preach in my church of Mexico City. I invite the good people to submit to authority and humbly to solicit the comforts of slavery, even if I have to present it as true freedom. But I'm not being crazy. I'm well aware that slavery is not immediately realizable. It will be one of the blessings of the future, that's all. In the meantime, I must get along with the present and seek at least a provisional solution. Hence I had to find another means of extending judgment to everybody in order to make it weigh less heavily on my own shoulders. I found the means. "Open the window a little, please. It's frightfully hot. Not too much, for I am cold also." My idea is both simple and fertile. How to get everyone involved in order to have the right to sit calmly on the outside myself. Should I climb up to the pulpit, like many of my illustrious contemporaries, and curse humanity? Very dangerous, that is. One day, or one night, laughter bursts out without a warning. The judgment you are passing on others eventually snaps back in your face, causing some damage. And so what, you ask? Well, here's the stroke of genius. I discovered that while waiting for the masters with their rods, we should, like Copernicus, reverse the reasoning to win out. Inasmuch as one couldn't condemn others without immediately judging oneself, one had to overwhelm oneself to have the right to judge others. Inasmuch as every judge some day ends up as a penitent, one had to travel the road in the opposite direction and practice the profession of penitent to be able to end up as a judge. You follow me? Good. But to make myself even clearer, I'll tell you how I operate. First, I closed my law office, left Paris, travelled. I aimed to set up under another name in some place where I shouldn't lack for a practice. There are many in the world, but chance, convenience, irony, and also the necessity for a certain mortification made me choose a capital of waters and fogs, girdled by canals, particularly crowded, and visited by men from all corners of the earth. I set up my office in a bar in the sailors' quarter. The clientele of a port town is varied. The poor don't go into the luxury districts, whereas eventually the gentlefolk always wind up, at least once, as you have seen, in the disreputable places. I lie in wait particularly for the bourgeois, and the straying bourgeois at that. It's with him that I get my best results. Like a virtuoso with a rare violin, I draw my subtlest sounds from him. So I have been practicing my useful profession at Mexico City for some time. It consists, to begin with, as you know from experience, in indulging in public confession as often as possible. I accuse myself up and down. It's not hard, for I now have acquired a memory. But let me point out that I don't accuse myself crudely, beating my breast. No, I navigate skillfully, multiplying distinctions and digressions too. In short, I adapt my words to my listener and lead him to go me one better. I mingle what concerns me and what concerns others. I choose the features we have in common, the experiences we have endured together, the failings we share. Good form, in other words, the man of the hour as he is rife in me and in others. With all that, I construct a portrait which is the image of all and of no one. A mask, in short, rather like those carnival masks which are both lifelike and stylized so that they make people say, "Why, surely I've met him." When the portrait is finished, as it is this evening, I show it with great sorrow. This, alas, is what I am. The prosecutor's charge is finished. But at the same time, the portrait I hold out to my contemporaries becomes a mirror. Covered with ashes, tearing my hair, my face scored by clawing, but with piercing eyes, I stand before all humanity, recapitulating my shames without losing sight of the effect I am producing, and saying, I was the lowest of the low. Then, imperceptibly, I pass from the I to the we. When I get to, this is what we are, the trick has been played, and I can tell them off. I am like them, to be sure. We are in the soup together. However, I have a superiority in that I know it, and this gives me the right to speak. You see the advantage? I am sure. The more I accuse myself, the more I have a right to judge you. Even better, I provoke you into judging yourself, and this relieves me of that much of the burden. Ah, mon cher, we are odd, wretched creatures, and if we merely look back over our lives, there's no lack of occasions to amaze and horrify ourselves. Just try. I shall listen, you may be sure, to your own confession with a great feeling of fraternity. Don't laugh. Yes, you are a difficult client. I saw that at once. But you'll come to it inevitably. Most of the others are more sentimental than intelligent. They are disconcerted at once. With the intelligent ones, it takes time. It is enough to explain the method fully to them. They don't forget it. They reflect. Sooner or later, half as a game and half out of emotional upset, they give up and tell all. You are not only intelligent, you look polished by use. Admit, however, that today you feel less pleased with yourself than you felt 5 days ago. Now I shall wait for you to write me or come back. For you will come back, I am sure. You'll find me unchanged. And why should I change, since I have found the happiness that suits me? I have accepted duplicity instead of being upset about it. On the contrary, I have settled into it and found there the comfort I was looking for throughout life. I was wrong, after all, to tell you that the essential was to avoid judgment. The essential is being able to permit oneself everything, even if, from time to time, one has to profess vociferously one's own infamy. I permit myself everything again, and without the laughter this time. I haven't changed my way of life. I continue to love myself and to make use of others. Only the confession of my crimes allows me to begin again lighter in heart, and to taste a double enjoyment, first of my nature, and secondly, of a charming repentance. Since finding my solution, I yield to everything, to women, to pride, to boredom, to resentment, and even to the fever that I feel delightfully rising at this moment. I dominate at last, but forever. Once more I have found a height to which I am the only one to climb, and from which I can judge everybody. At long intervals, on a really beautiful night, I occasionally hear a distant laugh, and again I doubt. But quickly I crush everything, people and things, under the weight of my own infirmity, and at once I perk up. So I shall await your respects at Mexico City as long as necessary. But remove this blanket. I want to breathe. You will come, won't you? I'll show you the details of my technique, for I feel a sort of affection for you. You will see me teaching them night after night that they are vile. This very evening, moreover, I shall resume. I can't do without it, or deny myself those moments when one of them collapses, with the help of alcohol, and beats his breast. Then I grow taller, très cher, I grow taller, I breathe freely, I am on the mountain, the plain stretches before my eyes. How intoxicating to feel like God the Father and to hand out definitive testimonials of bad character and habits. I sit enthroned among my bad angels at the summit of the Dutch heaven, and I watch ascending toward me as they issue from the fogs and the water, the multitude of the last judgment. They rise slowly. I already see the first of them arriving. On his bewildered face, half hidden by his hand, I read the melancholy of the common condition and the despair of not being able to escape it. And as for me, I pity without absolving. I understand without forgiving. And above all, I feel at last that I am being adored. Yes, I am moving about. How could I remain in bed like a good patient? I must be higher than you, and my thoughts lift me up. Such nights, or such mornings rather, for the fall occurs at dawn, I go out and walk briskly along the canals. In the livid sky, the layers of feathers become thinner, the doves move a little higher, and above the roofs a rosy light announces a new day of my creation. On the Damrak, the first streetcar sounds its bell in the damp air and marks the awakening of life at the extremity of this Europe where, at the same moment, hundreds of millions of men, my subjects, painfully slip out of bed, a bitter taste in their mouths, to go to a joyless work. Then, soaring over this whole continent which is under my sway without knowing it, drinking in the absinthe-coloured light of breaking day, intoxicated with evil words, I am happy, I tell you. I won't let you think I'm not happy. I am happy unto death. O sun, beaches, and the islands in the path of the trade winds, youth whose memory drives one to despair. I'm going back to bed. Forgive me. I fear I got worked up, yet I'm not weeping. At times, one wanders, doubting the facts, even when one has discovered the secrets of the good life. To be sure, my solution is not the ideal. But when you don't like your own life, when you know that you must change lives, you don't have any choice, do you? What can one do to become another? Impossible. One would have to cease being anyone, forget oneself for someone else, at least once. But how? Don't bear down too hard on me. I'm like that old beggar who wouldn't let go of my hand one day on a cafe terrace. Oh, sir, he said, it's not just that I'm no good, but you lose track of the light. Yes, we have lost track of the light, the mornings, the holy innocence of those who forgive themselves. Look, it's snowing. Oh, I must go out. Amsterdam asleep in the white night, the dark jade canals under the little snow-covered bridges, the empty streets, my muted steps. There will be purity, even if fleeting, before tomorrow's mud. See the huge flakes drifting against the window panes. It must be the doves, surely. They finally make up their minds to come down, the little dears. They are covering the waters and the roofs with a thick layer of feathers. They are fluttering at every window. What an invasion! Let's hope they are bringing good news. Everyone will be saved, eh? And not only the elect. Possessions and hardships will be shared, and you, for example, from today on you will sleep every night on the ground for me. The whole shooting match, eh? Come now, admit that you would be flabbergasted if a chariot came down from heaven to carry me off, or if the snow suddenly caught fire. You don't believe it, nor do I, but still, I must go out. All right. I'll be quiet. Don't get upset. Don't take my emotional outbursts or my ravings too seriously. They are controlled. Say, now that you're going to talk to me about yourself, I shall find out whether or not one of the objectives of my absorbing confession is achieved. I always hope, in fact, that my interlocutor will be a policeman and that he will arrest me for the theft of the just judges. For the rest, am I right? No one can arrest me. But as for that theft, it falls within the provisions of the law, and I have arranged everything so as to make myself an accomplice. I am harbouring that painting and showing it to whoever wants to see it. You would arrest me then. That would be a good beginning. Perhaps the rest would be taken care of subsequently. I would be decapitated, for instance, and I'd have no more fear of death. I'd be saved. Above the gathered crowd, you would hold up my still warm head so that they could recognize themselves in it, and I could again dominate. An exemplar. All would be consummated. I should have brought to a close, unseen and unknown, my career as a false prophet, crying in the wilderness and refusing to come forth. But of course you are not a policeman. That would be too easy. What? Ah, I suspected as much, you see. That strange affection I felt for you had sense to it then. In Paris, you practiced the noble profession of lawyer. I sense that we were of the same species. Are we not all alike, constantly talking and to no one, forever up against the same questions, although we know the answers in advance? Then please tell me what happened to you one night on the quays of the Seine, and how you managed never to risk your life. You yourself utter the words that for years have never ceased echoing through my nights, and that I shall at last say through your mouth. Oh, young woman, Throw yourself into the water again so that I may a second time have the chance of saving both of us. A second time, eh? What a risky suggestion. Just suppose, cher maître, that we should be taken literally. We'd have to go through with it. Brr, the water's so cold. But let's not worry. It's too late now. It will always be too late. Fortunately,